You know how some days start normal and then turn your whole world upside down? Well, let me tell you about one of those days. It happened just a few months back, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. Picture this: mountains of cardboard boxes everywhere you look. I mean, everywhere. Our living room looked like Amazon had exploded in there. My husband Tom, bless his heart, is what you'd politely call a collector. What I'd call a pack rat with good intentions. Books stacked to the ceiling, vintage tools that haven't seen daylight in years, vinyl records from bands nobody remembers, you name it. Tom's got 3 boxes of it tucked away somewhere. We'd been living in this 3-bedroom house in the suburbs for nearly 20 years, and somehow every closet, every corner, every spare inch had become home to Tom's treasures. But life has a funny way of forcing change on you. We were moving to a smaller place downtown. Downsizing, the real estate lady called it with that bright smile of hers. I called it finally getting my house back, though I kept that thought to myself most days. Now, Tom's always been a strong man. Worked construction for 30 years before his back started complaining. But he's not 20 anymore, and neither am I, if I'm being honest. I'm in my early 50s, and some mornings I feel every single one of those years in my bones. The thought of moving all this stuff by ourselves, it was enough to make me want to crawl back under the covers and pretend moving day wasn't coming. We'd spent weeks getting ready. Weeks of wrapping dishes in newspaper until my fingers were black with ink. Weeks of deciding what stayed and what went, though Tom had strong opinions about keeping just about everything. The packing tape dispenser became my constant companion, and I swear I heard that screeching sound in my sleep. But the actual moving part, the heavy lifting, the loading, the back-breaking work, that's where Mark came into the picture. Mark? Where do I even start with Mark? He's Tom's best friend, has been since they were kids getting into trouble down by Miller's Creek. You know the type, the friend who's more like a brother, who knows all your husband's embarrassing stories and still shows up when you need help. Mark's one of those solid, dependable guys you can count on. Salt of the earth, my mother would have called him. He's been on his own for about 3 years now, ever since his wife Sarah passed. Cancer took her fast. One day she was laughing at Tom's terrible jokes at our backyard barbecue, and 6 months later we were all dressed in black, trying to find words that didn't exist. I'd always been fond of Sarah. We used to spend Saturday mornings hunting through antique shops, looking for nothing in particular and everything all at once. She had this laugh that could fill a room, and she never met a stray cat she didn't try to feed. Losing her left a hole in all our lives, but especially in Mark's. Anyway, Tom knew his limits, even if he didn't always want to admit them. He could see the writing on the wall, or in this case, the towers of boxes reaching toward the ceiling. So he swallowed his pride and asked Mark for help. The morning of the move started out perfect, which should have been my first warning. The sun was shining like it was showing off, not a cloud in the sky, birds singing like they were auditioning for a Disney movie. Meanwhile, I felt like I had a fist clenched tight in my stomach, all nerves and worry about the day ahead. Tom was in his element, buzzing around the house like a caffeinated bee, pointing at boxes and making grand announcements about strategy. "This one goes in the truck first," he'd declare, as if he was planning a military operation instead of just moving our stuff across town. I tried to stay useful, keeping the coffee pot full and the path clear so nobody would break their neck tripping over Tom's collection of vintage fishing lures. The professional movers we'd hired for the big furniture were efficient but looked overwhelmed by the sheer volume of boxes. I couldn't blame them. Mark showed up around 8:30, his pickup truck gleaming in the morning sun, like he'd just rolled it off the lot. He always kept that truck spotless, said it was a matter of pride. He climbed out wearing his usual uniform, faded blue t-shirt that had seen better days, well-worn jeans, and those work boots that had probably walked 1,000 job sites. But it was his smile that I noticed first. That easy, genuine smile that could put anyone at ease, the kind that reached his eyes and made you feel like everything was going to be okay. "Morning, folks," he called out, his voice carrying that warm, familiar tone that felt like comfort food. "Ready to tackle this mountain of yours?" Tom practically bounced over to him, clapping him on the back hard enough to make a smaller man stumble. "Mark, couldn't have done this without you, buddy. Seriously." I walked over with a steaming mug of coffee, black to sugars, just how I remembered he liked it. "Thank you so much for coming, Mark. We really, truly appreciate this." He took the mug from my hands, and for just a second, his fingers brushed against mine. It was nothing, just an innocent moment of contact that happens 100 times a day between friends. But for some reason, it sent this little electric shock up my arm, like touching a doorknob after walking across carpet. I told myself it was just nerves, moving stress, the exhaustion of weeks of packing and planning. Nothing more than that. The first few hours flew by in a blur of organized chaos. Mark was like watching a machine work, lifting heavy boxes that Tom and I had struggled with, carrying them like they were filled with feathers instead of Tom's collection of vintage car magazines. He had this way of moving that was efficient and graceful at the same time, like he'd figured out the physics of lifting and decided to make it look easy. He was smart about it too, playing Tetris with the truck bed, fitting pieces together to make the most of every inch of space. I found myself stopping my own work just to watch him figure out how to make 3 boxes fit where logic said only 2 should go. We fell into a rhythm without even trying. Tom would stand there like a general, pointing and directing traffic. I'd label boxes with my black marker, making sure everything was organized for the unpacking marathon that waited for us at the other end. And Mark would just quietly do the impossible, making heavy things light, making complicated things simple. The work itself was comfortable. We didn't need to fill every moment with chatter. There was something peaceful about it, actually. The scrape of cardboard against wood, the occasional grunt of effort, the soft thud of boxes finding their places in the truck. It felt like a dance we all knew the steps to, but as the morning stretched on, something started to shift. It was subtle at first, like a change in air pressure before a storm that you feel in your bones before you see it in the sky. Maybe it was working so close together in the cramped spaces of our half-empty house. Maybe it was the intimacy of dismantling a life, touching all the personal things that make a house a home. Maybe it was just the exhaustion wearing down the usual barriers between people. Whatever it was, I started noticing things about Mark that I'd never paid attention to before. The way he'd pause and really think before moving something fragile. His brow furrowing in concentration like he was solving a puzzle. The way his t-shirt stretched across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy, showing the kind of strength that comes from years of honest work. The way his eyes, this warm, deep brown like good coffee, seemed to linger on me for just a heartbeat longer than they needed to. And I caught myself looking back, really looking, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Something that made my heart do this little skip beat thing that I'd almost forgotten was possible. It was confusing and unsettling and, if I'm being completely honest, a little thrilling. In a way that made me feel guilty for even thinking about it. Around noon, Tom announced he was making a food run. "Can't work an army on empty stomachs," he declared, grabbing his keys with the kind of enthusiasm he usually reserved for discovering a rare book at a garage sale. "I'll grab sandwiches from that deli you like, honey. Ham and Swiss for you, Mark." "Sounds perfect," Mark replied, setting down a box of Tom's record collection with the kind of care you'd use handling newborn babies. And then Tom was gone, leaving Mark and me alone in the house for the first time all day. The silence that settled over us felt different than the comfortable quiet we'd been working in all morning. This silence had weight to it. Electricity, like the air was charged with things we weren't saying. Mark leaned against a stack of boxes, pulling a bandana from his back pocket to wipe the sweat from his forehead. Even tired and dusty, there was something solid and reassuring about him, like a tree that had weathered 100 storms and was still standing strong. "You doing okay?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. "You look worn out." I sank into one of the few chairs we hadn't packed yet, suddenly feeling every one of my 50-plus years. "I am tired," I admitted, "but we're making good progress. Thanks to you." He smiled, that smile again, the one that made me feel seen and appreciated in a way that had nothing to do with being Tom's wife or anyone else's anything. "Just me, just Sarah, valued for who I was, happy to help," he said simply. "You and Tom have always been good to me, especially after," he trailed off. But we both knew what he meant. After Sarah, after his world fell apart and he had to figure out how to keep breathing. We sat there in the quiet, surrounded by the skeleton of our old life. The sun streaming through the dusty windows made everything look soft and dreamlike, illuminating the bare walls where our pictures used to hang, the empty shelves that once held our memories. Then Mark said something that caught me completely off guard. "You know," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight of memory, "Sarah always talked about you. She'd come home from your shopping trips just glowing, talking about something funny you'd said or some treasure you'd found together. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I'd miss those Saturday mornings with Sarah more than I'd let myself admit. She used to tell me, Mark continued, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch, that you were one of the kindest people she'd ever known. She said you had this way of making everyone feel important, like they mattered. Something shifted in that moment. All the grief I'd carried for Sarah, all the loneliness that had been my constant companion for longer than I cared to admit, all the strange, unexpected feelings I'd been having about Mark, it all came together into something powerful and confusing and completely overwhelming. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. What do you say to something like that? How do you explain that you've been feeling lost and invisible for years, and that just hearing those words made you feel human again? Mark must have seen something in my face because he pushed away from the boxes and took a step closer. His expression was soft, vulnerable in a way that made my heart ache. I miss her, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. God, I miss her so much some days I can barely breathe. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I stood up and reached out to him. Not with any plan or intention, just with the simple human need to comfort someone who was hurting. But he moved at the same moment, and instead of offering comfort from a safe distance, suddenly we were close. Close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with honest sweat, close enough that when he reached out and took my hand, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. His hand was warm and strong, marked with the calluses of a man who'd spent his life building things, fixing things, making things better. My own hand, soft and showing every one of my years, felt small and fragile wrapped in his. The contact wasn't inappropriate, we weren't crossing any lines that couldn't be uncrossed. But it was electric in a way that made every nerve in my body wake up and pay attention. It was a connection I hadn't felt in years, a spark that lit up parts of me I'd forgotten existed. He held my hand gently, his thumb moving in slow, comforting circles across my skin. We stood there frozen in time, surrounded by the echoes of our old lives and the uncertainty of whatever was happening between us. The silence stretched out, thick with unspoken words and feelings we didn't know how to name. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of traffic, the cheerful chirping of birds who had no idea that two people's worlds were quietly shifting on their foundations. Mark, I finally managed to whisper, his name catching in my throat like it was too big to get out. He looked at me with eyes that held so much grief, loneliness, hope, confusion, and something else that made my pulse quicken. I know, he said softly, and somehow those two simple words contain everything we couldn't say out loud. I know this is. I shouldn't be. He didn't need to finish. I understood perfectly. We both understood. The shared loss, the unexpected connection, the loneliness that had been eating at both of us for longer than we'd admitted, it was all there in the space between us, real and powerful and terrifying. Slowly, reluctantly, he released my hand. The absence of his touch left me feeling strangely empty, like I'd lost something I hadn't even known I was looking for. Tom will be back soon, I said, stating the obvious because I needed to fill the silence with something, anything. Yeah, he replied, stepping back and running a hand through his hair. For the first time since I'd known him, Mark looked flustered, uncertain. We should get back to work. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange, strained politeness. The easy rhythm we'd found in the morning was broken, replaced by careful distance and avoided glances. We still worked together, there were boxes to move and a truck to load, but the comfortable silence was gone, replaced by an awareness that made every accidental touch feel significant. Tom came back with lunch, full of stories about the traffic and the sandwich shop, and completely oblivious to the fact that something fundamental had shifted in his absence. He chattered cheerfully while we ate, telling jokes and keeping the mood light. In that way he always did. I tried to play along, tried to match his energy, but my heart wasn't in it. I felt like I was watching myself from outside, like an actress playing the role of Tom's wife, while the real me was somewhere else entirely, trying to make sense of what had just happened. By late afternoon, the truck was packed full, and the house stood empty, stripped of our belongings. It looked like a shell of its former self, just walls and floors and windows, waiting for the next family to fill it with their own memories and dreams. Location: we all stood on the porch surveying the scene. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn, painting the world in hues of orange and gold. Well, Tom said, clapping his hands together, that's that. Thanks again, Marky. You won. Mark smiled, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. Anytime, Tom. Glad to help. He turned to me, and for a brief moment his gaze locked with mine. There was a silent message there, a question, a plea, a promise. I couldn't decipher it, but I felt its weight, its significance. Thank you, Mark, I said, my voice barely audible for everything. He nodded, then climbed into his truck. With a wave he drove off, leaving us standing on the empty porch. Drive to the new apartment was a blur. Tom chattered on about the new neighborhood, the local restaurants, and the exciting possibilities that lay ahead. I nodded and smiled, but my mind was miles away, replaying the events of the day, trying to make sense of what had happened. The apartment was small but bright and airy. It had a view of the city skyline, a welcome change from the suburban landscape we were used to. Buddhas. I looked around at the unpacked boxes, the unfamiliar furniture, and the sterile white walls. I felt a pang of loneliness that night after Tom had fallen asleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The events of the day were played in my mind, the weight of them pressing down on me. Mark's hand in Minna, his words about Sarah, the unspoken longing in his eyes. What did it all mean? Was it just a fleeting moment of weakness? A temporary lapse in judgment fueled by grief and exhaustion? Or was it something more, something deeper? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that something had shifted within me. Something had awakened. I knew he couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. I couldn't just sweep it under the rug and pretend that everything was fine. The next morning I woke up with a resolve. I needed to talk to Mark. I needed to understand what had happened, what it meant, and where we went from here. But though, could I do that without hurting Tom? Without betraying his trust? That was the question that haunted me for the next few days. A question that I didn't have an answer to. A question that threatened to unravel everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, and my life. He spent the next few days unpacking, trying to create a sense of normalcy in our new home. Tom, oblivious to my inner turmoil, was happy and excited about the move. He explored the neighborhood, made friends with the doorman, and spent hours rearranging his collection of vintage idols. I tried to be present, to engage with him, but my mind kept drifting back to Mark. I found myself checking my phone constantly, hoping for a text or a call. Even drove by his house once just to see if his truck was there. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't help myself. I was drawn to him, to the possibility of something more, like a moth to a flame. Finally, after 3 days of agonization, I made up my mind. I had to talk to him. I had talked. No, I waited until Tom was out running errands. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Mark's number. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to the ringing ring. Felt like an eternity. Finally he answered. Hello. His voice was hesitant, cautious. Mark, I said, my voice trembling. It's Sarah. There was a long pause. Sarah, he said softly. I was wondering if I hear from you. Mark, I repeated, my voice a little steadier this time. I need to talk to you. Another long pause. I could practically feel the weight of his silence on the other end of the line. I think that's a good idea, he finally said, his voice low and serious. When and where can you meet me? At the park, I suggested, thinking of the small secluded park a few blocks from our old house, the one by the creek. The creek? He echoed, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. Yeah, I know it. How about noon? I agreed. I'll see you then. I hung up the phone, my heart still pounding, but with a sense of relief. At least I was doing something. At least I was taking control of the situation. The hours leading up to noon crawled by. I paced the apartment, cleaned it obsessively, and tried to distract myself with a book. But my mind was a whirlwind of anxiety and anticipation. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, imagining all the possible outcomes. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if he regretted holding my hand? What if he thought I was crazy? And even if he did feel something, what then? Was I really willing to risk my marriage for a chance at something new? The questions swirled around me, threatening to drown me in doubt. But beneath the anxiety there was a flicker of excitement, a spark of hope that wouldn't be extinguished. Finally, the clock struck noon. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and headed out the door. The park was just as I remembered it, a small oasis of green in the middle of the bustling city. The creek gurgled merrilious. It whelmed its way through the trees, a familiar soundtrack to my childhood memories. I spotted Mark sitting on a bench near the water, his back to me. He was wearing the same faded blue t-shirt and jeans he'd worn on moving day. He looked older, more weathered, but still undeniably attractive. I walked towards him, my footsteps muffled by the soft grass. As I got closer, he turned and saw me. His eyes widened slightly, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sarah," he said, standing up. "Thanks for coming. Thank you for meeting me," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of our shared history and the uncertainty of our future. "Azo," he said, breaking the silence. "What did you want to talk about?" He took a deep breath. "About what happened on moving day," I said, my voice trembling slightly. About the way we both felt." He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about it too," he said a lot. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "I'm married, Mark. I love Tom, but you felt something," he finished for me, "and so did I." I looked down at my hands, ashamed. "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said. "I didn't want to hurt Inyoni." He reached out and gently took my hand. His touch was warm and reassuring. "I know," he said. "Neither did I." We sat down on the bench side by side, our hands still clasped together. The creek gurgled beside us, a constant reminder of the passage of time. "I miss Sarah," he said softly, his voice filled with grief. "I miss her every day, and being around you, seeing your kindness, your strength, it reminded me of her." "I miss her too," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "She was a wonderful woman." We sat in silence for a moment, sharing our grief or memories of Sarah. It was a strange, intimate connection born out of loss and longing. "But it's more than that, isn't it?" I finally said, breaking the silence. "It's not just about Sarah." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and hope. "No, hesitate, it's not. I'd always been drawn to you, Sarah, even when Sarah Wazel, if you have this light about you, this warmth, this kindness. I've always admired it." I was stunned. I had no idea he felt that way. "Too, don't know what to say," I stammered. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I just wanted you to know." He paused, then took a deep breath. "Look, Hazade, I'm not trying to break up your marriage. I respect Tom too much, but I couldn't just pretend that nothing happened. I needed to be honest with you and with myself." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "Thank you," I said, "for being honest." We sat in silence for a long time, our hands still clasped at each other. The creek gurgled beside us, a constant reminder of the complexities of life, of love and of loss. Finally I spoke. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and resignation. "I don't know," he said. "That's up to you." I squeezed my hand gently, then released it. He stood up and walked over to the edge of the creek, staring into the water. "I'm not going to tell you to leave." Tom has his back to me. I wouldn't do that to him, and I wouldn't do that to you. You need to decide what's best for you, what's going to make you happy." He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "But I want you to know that I'm here," he said. "If you ever need me, if you ever decide that you want something more, I'll be here." He paused, then added softly, "I'll always be here." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving me sitting on the bench alone with my thoughts and my emotions. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. To what was I going to do? Could I ignore what happened, bury my feelings, and pretend that everything was fine? Or was I brave enough to risk everything for a chance at something new? The answer I knew lay within me, but finding it wouldn't be easy. The walk back to the apartment was a daze. The city noises, usually a comforting hum, felt abrasive and intrusive. My mind was a battlefield torn between loyalty and desire, between the familiar comfort of my marriage and the tantalizing allure of the unknown. I replayed Mark's words over and over. "I'll be here." The simplicity of that promise, the quiet strength behind it, resonated deep within me. It wasn't a demand or even a suggestion, but a simple statement of fact, a lifeless perhaps. When I got back to the apartment, Tom was there, tearing around in the kitchen. He looked up as I walked in, his face lighting up with a smile. "Hey honey," he said, "how was your walk?" I forced a smile. "It was nice," I replied, "just what I needed." He didn't seem to notice my hesitation. My strained tone launched into a story about a new recipe he was trying, his enthusiasm infectious. I listened, nodding and making the appropriate responses, but my mind was elsewhere. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, the silence felt different. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a couple who had shared years of their lives together, but a strained, uneasy silence, filled with unspoken questions and hidden anxieties. I tried to engage Tom in conversation, but my attempts felt forced and unnatural. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living a lie, that I was betraying him simply by being near him after dinner. I excused myself and went to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't keep living like this with this secret hanging between us. I had to make a decision, but how could I choose between two men who both meant so much to me? Tom walked into the bedroom sensing mistress. He sat down beside me and took my hand. "What's wrong, honey?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "You've been acting strange all day." I looked at him, at his kind familiar face, and the tears started to flow. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Two don't know what to do," I sobbed. "I'm so confused." He wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. "It's okay," he said softly. "You can tell me anything." And so I did. I told him everything. About the move, about the loneliness, about Sarah's passing, about Mark, about the hand-holding, about the conversation in the park. I poured out my heart, confessing my confusion, my guilt and my conflicting emotions. Tom listened patiently without interrupting. Without judging, when I was finished, he held me tighter. "I understand," he said quietly. "I can see how you'd be confused. It's been a tough time for both of us." Hephaus then added, "I know I haven't been the most attentive husband lately. I've been so focused on the move in my collections that I haven't been paying attention to your needs." His words were like a balm to my wounded soul. He wasn't angry. He wasn't accusatory. He was understanding and compassionate. "I love you, Sarah," he said. "I don't want to lose you, but I also want you to be happy. If you think that you'd be happier with Mark, then I won't stand in your way." His words were like a knife to my heart. The thought of leaving him, of hurting him, was unbearable. "I don't want to leave you, Tom," I said, my voice choked with tears. "I love you too, but I don't know if I can just forget what happened. I don't know if I can go back to the way things were." He took my face in his hands and looked me in the eyes. "Then don't," he said. "Don't try to forget. Acknowledge what happened, learn from it, and move forward. We can work through this, Sarah. We can find a way to make our marriage stronger, more meaningful." His words gave me hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could survive this. Maybe you could rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty and understanding. I spent the next few weeks in intense self-reflection. I thought about what I wanted, what I needed, and what I was willing to sacrifice. I talked to Tom openly and honestly about my feelings, my fears, and my desires. We decided to try couples therapy. It was difficult, painful at times, but it helped us to communicate more effectively and to understand each other's needs. I'd also decided to talk to Mark. I met him at the park again, the place where it all began. "You've made a decision," I said, my voice clear and steady. He looked at me, his eyes filled with anticipation. "And I'm staying with Tom," I said. "I love him and I believe that we can make our marriage work, but I also want to be honest with you. I value your friendship, Mark, and I don't want to lose that." He nodded slowly, his face a mixture of disappointment and understanding. "I understand," he said. "I respect your decision, and I appreciate you being honest with me." We agreed to remain friends, but to maintain a certain distance. We wouldn't spend time alone together, and we would be careful not to cross any boundaries. It wasn't easy. There were moments of temptation, moments of doubt, months when I wondered if I had made the right decision. But I stayed committed to marriage, to working on our relationship, and to building a future with Tom. Slowly, gradually, our marriage began to heal. We rediscovered the love and passion that had been buried beneath years of routine and complacency. We learned to communicate more effectively, to appreciate each other's strengths, and to forgive each other's weaknesses. We even started going antiquing again, something Sarah and I used to enjoy. It was a way of honoring her memory and of celebrating the bond that we had shared. Looking back, I realized that the move, the boxes, and the unexpected connection with Mark were all catalysts for change. They forced me to confront my own desires, my own insecurities, and my own mortality. They taught me the importance of honesty, communication, and forgiveness. Our marriage isn't perfect. We still have our struggles, our disagreements, and our moments of doubt. But we are stronger now, more resilient and more deeply connected than ever before. And as for Mark, he remains a part of our lives, a friend, a reminder of the challenges we have overcome and the choices we have made. He eventually found love again, a kind woman who shared his passion for gardening and his quiet appreciation for the simple things in life. I was happy for him. He deserved to find happiness again. Life is full of surprises, of unexpectations, and of difficult choices, but it is through these challenges that we grow, that we learn, and that we discover the true meaning of love and commitment. So that's my story. It's not a fairy tale, and it doesn't have a perfect ending, but it's real, it's honest, and it's a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories.